Residents of our city were frightened by strange clouds.
Here are the chemtrails flying around spraying.
Chemtrails is a program stratospheric aerosol geoengineering.
The chemical aerosol spraying down on our heads. It's not an inversion trail.
So many people in the world don't need.
These things are spraying chemicals in the sky.
Viruses, bacteria, heavy metals, Magellan disease, aluminum, barium, strontium.
Poisonous substances are being sprayed over us. The overall goal, the reduction of humanity.
Military program to carry out the world government's plan to reduce population. The occupation government of several countries is secretly spraying from passenger planes climatic, chemical, bacteriological, as well as psychotropic weapons under the guise of aircraft inversion trails. The chemical trail theory has become the most popular and most sweeping conspiracy theory of the 21st century. Over the 25 years of its existence, it has reached tens or even hundreds of millions of people around the world. Like any conspiracy theory, chemtrails have their opponents and their supporters. Both have weighty arguments, evidence, and facts. Let's look into this topic in detail together with you and try to figure out who is right and who is wrong. Proponents of chemtrails are convinced that true contrails last 1 to 10 minutes in the sky, while chemtrails last up to several hours. Chemtrails are attributed to the formation of a chemical grid, as well as the formation of cirrus clouds that change the weather.
I show you a real inversion trail, and this is what it looks like. A small strip that immediately disappears behind the plane. And why doesn't the chemtrail trace dissolve, but the normal trace dissolves quickly?
A condensation trail is a visible trail in the air consisting of condensed moisture or small ice crystals, arising in the troposphere from aircraft engines as a result of fuel combustion. This phenomenon occurs not only in aircraft, but also in helicopters. Two parameters, humidity and air temperature, affect the duration of condensation trails. If the humidity at high altitude is not high and the air temperature is not high enough, the condensation trail will disappear almost instantly. Conversely, with high humidity and cold air the contrail will be long and more stable. In the polar regions, the lower limit of the contrail aircraft can reach up to 3,000 meters, and in some cases at the very surface of the ground. The optical illusion is often the reason for believing in chemtrails.
There are two planes flying in the sky. Notice that one plane has almost no contrail. See the difference? That's suspicious.
When observing from the ground it is impossible to determine visually at what altitude the two planes are flying, at the same or different altitudes, and how far apart they are from each other. It is also impossible to visually determine the size of the planes. It may appear to the observer that two planes are flying at the same altitude, but they have different contrails. In fact, a smaller airplane flying at 28,000 feet may be perceived as a larger airplane flying at 40,000 feet. This is an optical illusion. Temperatures at 28,000 feet will be higher and so the contrail of the smaller plane will dissolve faster or be shorter. An airplane that flies several miles higher will have a longer contrail. Sometimes the inversion trace appears irregularly and it looks like a hand drop of chemicals during an airplane flight.
Here the plane flies and draws a dotted line. The pilot is dropping something.
This phenomenon can occur at about 28,000 feet, when relatively warm air currents begin to penetrate the colder atmospheric layers, changing the temperature and humidity of the air. Perhaps chemtrail proponents would agree with this evidence. But how do we explain another phenomenon, such as the chemtrail grid and crosshairs? Such meshes are observed all over the world. Does it look like the pilots are on a secret mission?
Note: parallel to this trace, the second plane crosses the course of the other plane and sets the net. This is very suspicious.
This phenomenon has a simple explanation. In this example, the airplane flies from point A to point B. The contrail left behind by the plane is displaced by the wind on two axes relative to the flight path. Sometime later another plane flies from point A to point B along the same route. Its contrail crosses the contrail already shifted sideways left by the other aircraft, creating the illusion of a deliberate crossover. The grid is formed because the contrails do not dissolve and hang in the sky for a very long time, and the wind shifts the contrails relative to the direction of flight of the planes. After a while, these contrail tracks cross the air paths of other planes. This phenomenon can occur if planes fly only in two directions. Very often people complain that after chemtrails the weather and their well-being deteriorates. This is true, but it has nothing to do with chemtrails. Contrails belong to the type of man-made cirrus clouds and are formed under the same conditions as cirrus clouds of natural character. Usually such favorable weather conditions occur before the arrival of a warm atmospheric front, which is exactly what forms the rains. Even folkmen say that cirrus clouds bring rainy weather. As a result of the change in atmospheric pressure, many people's health deteriorates and they blame it on chemtrails. Chemtrail adepts assure us that a few decades ago, contrails disappeared faster, fewer planes were flying, and the skies were clear without cirrus clouds. This is the US sky in 1970. This is in 1972. This is the sky over London in 1986. This is the US again in the early 90s. The photos show that the contrails have been in the sky for quite some time. The only thing the chemtrail proponents were right about was that there were actually fewer planes a few decades ago. Over the past 20 years alone, the global airline fleet has grown by 65%, and annual traffic is growing by about 4% a year. In the race for passenger capacity, the demand for large, long-haul aircraft has increased. Together with them increased in size and the engines, whose power has increased significantly. Modern aircraft engines generate more heat when they burn fuel, which contributes to dense contrails. The engine air intake can fit a full-size person. The condensation trace is an elongated cloud that traps heat in the lower atmosphere, creating a greenhouse effect. Back in the early 2000s, NASA specialists began to record an increase in cirrus clouds over U.S. territory. This was a consequence of an increase in air traffic. The density of contrails was so great that it led to the formation of dense cirrus clouds. This can be clearly seen in the satellite images. When aviation fuel burns, huge amounts of carbon dioxide and water vapor are released into the atmosphere, as well as a mass of toxic substances and soot. For example, a Boeing 777 flying from Moscow to Sydney will release into the atmosphere approximately 330,000 feet of carbon dioxide and more than 110,000 pounds of water vapor. There will also be 300 pounds of nitrogen oxide released into the atmosphere. Today, civil aviation accounts for 3% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions. Yes, that's relatively small, but recent studies show that by 2050, airplanes will triple that impact. Air transport increases cloud cover on our planet and greatly affects the environment. But chemtrail supporters do not believe this data and believe that the world government is deceiving humanity. It would be naive to believe that the chemtrail theory is based on an optical illusion and a lack of basic knowledge of the school curriculum. Chemtrail adepts have more convincing facts about the existence of chemtrails. Let's take a look at them. Let's break down the 5 basic points on which the theory of chemtrails is built. War in Vietnam. During the Vietnam War from 1962 to 1971, the United States actively sprayed defoliants and herbicides over Vietnam with aircraft. The purpose of the spraying was to destroy the jungle vegetation in order to make it easier to detect North Vietnamese army and guerrilla units. The natives skillfully used their terrain for tactical purposes. In addition to forested areas, fields and orchards were also destroyed, thus depriving the army and people of North Vietnam of food. Over 9 years, 20,077,075 gallons of chemicals were dumped on Vietnam. That's 1,270 railroad tanks of chemicals. The concentration of herbicides was 50 times what was used in agriculture. The consequences of such chemical attacks were terrifying. The chemicals that entered the human body with water and food caused various severe liver and blood diseases and caused birth defects in newborns. During the rainy season, the U.S. military used a climatic weapon by seeding clouds with silver iodide. The chemicals were dumped by planes and helicopters. This caused additional precipitation 3 times higher than normal. This caused flooding of rice fields, as well as the erosion of important transportation hubs through which the guerrillas of North Vietnam were supplied with arms and ammunition. Despite the secrecy of the operation, information that the U.S. was using chemicals in Vietnam began to leak out. But the official White House denied any involvement in these crimes. It was only after journalists visited Vietnam and gathered hard evidence that the U.S. government admitted to using chemicals. This sparked protests among U.S. residents. This historical fact is used by proponents of chemtrails as evidence that chemical and climatic weapons have already been used against humanity. In fact, there is no connection between modern chemtrails and the chemical attacks in Vietnam. Today, the method of artificially inducing additional precipitation is widely used by China, Saudi Arabia and other countries. And this practice is also used at ski resorts for extra snow. The reagents are sprayed directly over the clouds at altitudes ranging from 5,000 to 16,000 feet, depending on meteorological conditions. Let's go back to what happened in Vietnam. To treat a particular area, the planes would fly out in groups, and when spraying, they would stand side by side a short distance away from each other, increasing the area and intensity of the spraying. The flight altitude of the planes was not to exceed 50 meters, and windless weather was required, so the spraying was carried out mainly in the morning hours. Chemical sprays cause serious illness among aircrews. Even assuming that chemtrails exist, from a flight altitude of 26,000 to 40,000 feet, it wouldn't do any harm on the ground. Open airspace is so voluminous that it is impossible in principle to create a dangerous concentration of hazardous or poisonous substances in it. Stratospheric aerosol injection. In June 1991, the Pinatubo volcano in the Philippines erupted, making it the strongest volcano of the 20th century. The column of gas and ash rose to an altitude of 80,000 feet. In total, the eruption released 20 million tons of chemical aerosols into the stratosphere. The column of gas and ash rose to an altitude of 80,000 feet. In total, the eruption released 20 million tons of chemical aerosols into the stratosphere. They blocked the sun's rays and caused the Earth's temperature to drop by about 1 degree Fahrenheit. This effect lasted only a short time, only a few years. But the very fact that the temperature of the lower layers of the atmosphere decreased, made scientists think about trying to artificially apply chemical aerosols in the atmosphere to reflect sunlight. This proposed method is called stratospheric aerosol injection, abbreviated to SAI. Calculations have shown that if artificial aerosols are used on a large scale and over a long period of time, the rate of global warming can be significantly reduced. Before 2006, geoengineering was considered taboo because of concerns that its study would hinder efforts to reduce emissions. In June 2016, CIA Director John Brennan confirmed that the U.S. is working on the stratospheric aerosol infection program. John Brennan voiced the approximate cost of the project, which will be about $10 billion per year. To carry out this scientific program, 100 special high-altitude aircraft will be needed, spraying aerosol at an altitude of 60,000 feet daily to reflect sunlight. To achieve a positive effect, it would take several decades before the Earth's temperature would begin to change. Spraying aerosol from 36,000 feet in conventional passenger aircraft is considered ineffective because the aerosol particles will quickly settle to the ground without producing a positive result. Even a country like the United States would not be able to carry out such a project alone. Geoengineering is a global intervention in nature, which will require the creation of an equally global infrastructure around the world. Implementing this program will require hundreds of special planes, several thousand employees, dozens of chemical plants around the world, as well as a large number of warehouses and special vehicles. Therefore, it would be impossible to hide such activities from the public. This method is still science fiction and is unlikely to be feasible in the next 15 to 20 years. Scientists have not yet come to a consensus on the consequences of such interference in nature, and many believe that it will bring the opposite result. But conspiracy theorists believe that stratospheric aerosol injection exists and that geoengineering is just a cover for the insidious designs of a secret government. U.S. Air Force report. "1996 officially became the birth of chemtrails after the U.S. Air Force published a public report in the press titled, 'Weather is a Power Multiplier of Weather Power in 2025. The essence of the report was that from now on, nuclear weapons are relegated to the bench and the new world bogeyman is climate weapons, which will change the balance of power in favor of the United States in the event of military conflict. The report said that the new technology will allow the Pentagon to ensure global dominance in warfare in 2025. Out of more than 40 pages of the report, only a few pages were devoted to aerosol spraying in the troposphere. Officers of the military department suggested spraying aerosol using aircraft engines. Prior to the attack, which is coordinated with forecasted weather conditions, the UAVs begin cloud generation and seeding operations. UAVs disperse acorns shield to deny enemy visual and infrared. It follows from the second paragraph that unmanned aerial vehicles can indeed create special puffy clouds. More than 15 pages of the report describe the principle itself. Numerous dispersal techniques have already been studied, but the most convenient, safe, and cost-effective method discussed is the use of afterburner-type jet engines to generate carbon particles while flying through the targeted air. This method is based on injection of liquid hydrocarbon fuel into the afterburner's combustion gases. To the surprise of many, this method of spraying aerosol through the afterburner of aircraft engines actually exists. But does this mean that this technology can be used covertly on passenger or transport aircraft? Definitely not. The report clearly described the use of jet engines afterburner, and the afterburner is only on supersonic military fighters and bombers. It is the presence of the afterburner in the jet engine that allows injection of any fluids to be carried out completely safely for the aircraft. Therefore, passenger and military transport aircraft are not suitable for this purpose because of the lack of afterburner. It is the presence of the afterburner in the jet engine that allows injection of any fluids to be carried out completely safely for the aircraft. Therefore, passenger and military transport aircraft are not suitable for this purpose because of the lack of afterburner. And most importantly, the second sheet of the report reads as follows. The views expressed in this report are those of the authors and do not reflect the official policy or position of the United States Air Force, Department of Defense, or the United States government. This publication has been reviewed by security and policy review authorities, is unclassified, and is cleared for public release. It would be naive to believe that U.S. Air Force officers uncovered secret world government information and security and political control agencies overlooked it. Obviously, the Pentagon staff could not have written more than what was already known to a potential adversary. But this does not mean that the whole report was a bluff. Undoubtedly, the United States was developing advanced weapons and cloaking devices, and it is logical to assume that they were conducting experiments to assess the effectiveness and accuracy of new weapons. Perhaps the results of these experiments were seen by Americans in the skies of some states, leading to the spread of rumors about chemtrails. Act H.R. 2977.
On October 2, 2001, the U.S. passed H.R. 2977, the Defense of Outer Space Act. Subparagraph 7b gave a list of so-called exotic warfare systems, where chemtrails were on the list of effects. This same category of exposure included electronic, psychotropic, informational, low-frequency wave exposure, plasma, electromagnetic, ultrasonic defeat systems. It is absolutely obvious from this act that chemtrails belong to the weapons of mass destruction.
This act is interpreted by supporters of chemtrails as further irrefutable evidence of the acceptance of chemtrails by the U.S. authorities. Let us examine what this act is and who is behind it. To begin with, Act H.R. 2977 has no legal force whatsoever. It is just a bill that is very often introduced by congressmen. She and politician Dennis Kucinich introduced the aforementioned bill in the United States Congress. To clarify, this very strange bill was primarily concerned with the protection of outer space and forbade the basing of any kind of weapon in space, including extraterrestrial weapons, suggesting alien technology. Yes, this is neither a mistake nor absurd. In fact, the text of this bill was written by Dr. Carol Rosin, a space and missile defense consultant. She was Wernher von Braun's press secretary in the 70s. According to Carol Rosin, before she died, von Braun told her of a conspiracy by the US government and the military-industrial complex. Von Braun told her that in the future, under the guise of repelling alien threats, an arms buildup would be carried out in space. Since then, Carol Rosin has devoted her life to exposing this conspiracy and proving the existence of UFOs. Being absolutely convinced that the United States government possesses alien technology, Carol Rosin put extraterrestrial weapons in the text of the act. Oddly enough, Dr. Rosin received the support of various famous people, including Congressman Dennis Kucinich. But what interest did Kucinich have in this, and how did chemtrails get into the text of the act? Kucinich positioned himself as an advocate of workers' interests, and at the time many Americans did not trust the government and were alarmed by flying saucers and contrails in the sky. Kucinich decided to score political points on this topic. In addition, Kucinich planned to run for the Democratic presidential nomination in 2004. Defeating the rival Republican Party of President-elect George W. Bush was part of Kucinich's political agenda. As a result, this act, which can safely be called populist, succumbed to Kucinich 3 times in 5 years and was rejected 3 times by the U.S. Congress. So there is no sensation here either, but rather a deliberate delusion. State of Louisiana. In 2007, an event occurred in the United States, after which chemtrails were talked about all over the world, including Russia. Residents of the state of Louisiana reported on local television that the sky was covered with a network of contrails of airplanes, and a concentration of barium salts was seen in the atmosphere. A local TV channel was involved in the incident and concluded that chemtrails were to blame. As proof, the TV channel published the results of the samples taken, which were 3 times higher than the permissible norms. Later it turned out that the TV channel made a mistake and overstated the concentration by 1,000 times. But the story, in which the TV channel confirms the existence of chemtrails, has already circulated on the internet. The development of the internet in the world in the early 2000s led to the spread of other conspiracy theories. This is how people learned about the existence of reptiloids, that the Earth is flat, and that space does not exist at all. But most importantly, people learned about a world government conspiracy called the Golden Billion, according to which the optimal number of people on the planet should not exceed 1 billion. The extermination of humanity by sterilization and mutation was quickly linked to the American chemical company Monsanto, a leader in the production and sale of transgenic seeds. Conspiracists at the time claimed that chemtrails around the world were spraying aluminum to destroy cultivated plants, while Monsanto was ramping up sales of aluminum-resistant, modified seeds. By the way, The analysis of samples that allegedly contain high levels of hazardous substances cannot be proof of the existence of chemtrails. All these samples are taken at the surface where the pollution can be of any nature. The irony of the golden billion is that in 50 years of this conspiracy theory to destroy humanity, the number of people on the planet has exactly doubled, by 4 billion people, and stubbornly continues to grow. But conspiracy theorists do not believe this fact, nor do they believe Google Maps, which show how cities around the world have been standing for the past 20 years. Not so long ago, conspiracy theorists claimed that chemtrail pilots were Secret Service agents who had no relatives or friends, which is why they so easily commit crimes. Russians have long referred to the treaty between Russia and NATO, under which U.S. Air Force transport planes were secretly spraying chemtrails over Russia under the guise of transporting weapons from Afghanistan. Over the years, conspiracy theorists have changed the legend, and today it is passenger planes, not military planes, that are dropping the chemicals. Now it is no longer the pilots who personally push the chemical dump buttons, it is done remotely by operators via satellite communication. The composition of the chemical aerosol spray, according to conspiracy theorists, has now changed so much that it no longer contains the table of chemical elements. Chemtrail theorists are convinced that COVID-19 does not exist and that the culprit is the expensive carafe sprayed by chemtrails. It causes chemical pulmonary pneumonia and thrombosis. But that's not all. Proponents of chemtrails are convinced that the planes are dropping indeterminate forms of living microorganisms and even cancer cells, as well as smart dust saturated with nanoparticles and even nanofibers, which, under the influence of 5G communication towers, begin to control human consciousness and control their bodies. While there used to be a logic in the theory of the golden billion in conjunction with Monsanto that the world's elite would eat natural products and all the surplus population would consume genetically modified products, today there is no such logic. Today the world's secret government is also destroying itself by breathing the same air as everyone else. On the background of this inconsistency, even a new version of the world conspiracy theory was born, that the world was taken over by Satanists, whose aim is to destroy all living things aimlessly. But then the question arises, why complicate everything so much, if you could just unleash a nuclear war and end life on the planet in a few tens of minutes? And at the end of the film, I would like to touch on the subject of fakes. The most popular fakes are photos of pilots with chemtrail insignia. The conspiracy theorists themselves say that in this way the chemtrail pilots no longer hide anything and openly laugh at their victims by openly showing their faces. In fact, the pilots are just trolling conspiracy theorists and pouring oil on the fire. Such chemtrail emblems can be bought on the internet or downloaded from the internet and then made fake with Photoshop. Dashboard photos can fall into this category. With Photoshop, you can make any lettering you want. There are so many such fakes that there is no point in describing each fake photo in detail, so let's briefly review the individual points. These barrels are not chemical containers, they are water barrels. They are installed during aircraft tests at different center of gravity positions and simulate test passengers. What conspiracy theorists pass off as spray nozzles are wire antennas on airplanes. This device simulates the icing of an airplane in flight. They also often try to pass off the spraying of liquid from firefighting planes and the spraying of toxins to poison mosquitoes as proof of chemtrails, as well as emergency fuel discharges in flight. And this seeding of clouds with liquid nitrogen to enhance precipitation is also passed off as evidence of the existence of chemtrails. A rare and beautiful atmospheric phenomenon called morning gloria, which forms only in Australia, also falls into this category of fakes. This video was shot accidentally at a German airport, presented by conspiracy theorists as a spontaneous release of chemicals during the maintenance of the plane. In reality, it was a startup of an auxiliary power plant after a small repair, with some oil in the turbine. Chemtrail technology is credited with patents for creating a smoke countertrail of a training flying target, patents for extinguishing fires with aviation, and even jet engine condensate drainage tubing. The numerous stories that there are some anonymous fired pilots and aircraft mechanics who are directly involved in the chemtrails are just rumors that are not confirmed by any documents or video footage. And there is no point in commenting on them. And there is such a logical explanation for every conspiracy theorist argument. Alas, even Edward Snowden, who had access to classified CIA information, in his interview with the American blogger Joe Rogan, did not confirm the existence of chemtrails. Certainly the number of deadly diseases and dangerous chronic illnesses has increased over the last few decades. But what does this have to do with chemtrails when the number of cars has quintupled in the last 50 years? Over the same 50 years, more than 70% of the world's forests have been destroyed, and the world's population has doubled. Add to this the growth of global industry and then it becomes clear that the mythical chemtrails have nothing to do with it. Scientists have found that people with low self-esteem and anxiety are most likely to believe in conspiracy theories. The main factors that lead people to believe in various conspiracy theories are distrust of authority, as well as social upheavals similar to those experienced by humanity around the world today. Anxiety sufferers need certainty and readily accept quick answers found on the internet. The famous public figures who categorically declare the existence of chemtrails add fuel to the fire. We should not forget that these are, first and foremost, ordinary people who are just as susceptible to social upheaval as anyone else. This video is not intended to change the minds of conspiracy theory proponents. Conspiracy science is not just a delusion, conspiracy science is a human mental state. Proponents of conspiracy theories are comfortable in this state, it is their inner world, which they militantly defend against basic knowledge of the school curriculum, scientific evidence, and commonly known facts. To this we should add that the internet is becoming stupid every year and very quickly kills people's sanity. In my opinion, the threat to humanity is an overabundance of garbage information on the internet, which inevitably leads to accelerated degradation of brain functions and causes mental disorders, which will inevitably lead to the death of mankind.
Вот химтрейлы летят, распыляют. Два самолета, один за другим.
Рассыпалась с самолетов химическая пыль. Писали в ФСБ, писали в военную контрразведку.
Самолеты, кроме всего прочего, могут распылять наночастицы. Микрочастицы графена в виде порошка.
Если за действиями наших президентов стоят пришельцы...
Будет ли интервью еще с девушкой-рептилоидом? Обязательно будет.